You talked in the book about competitors versus rivals on a personal basis. Tell me how you got through that experience, because if we're not careful, that's something that can start to eat away at us, that could actually be more corrosive and bring us down versus, the opposite. Talk about that.
So I was at an event where, as you said, there was someone I spoke with who I'm in the same industry as. He writes books, he gives speeches, he's very, very good at what he does. He's well respected, and I respect his work as well. And I hate him. I have an irrational hatred of him. And as a result of my irrational hatred of him, I'm extremely competitive with him.
Because he eats your lunch.
He just he...
Better numbers, better book sales.
Who knows?
Better looking.
I will regularly, let's not go too far. I will regularly compare my book sales with his online. And if my numbers are higher, I'm all smug. And if his numbers are higher, I sort of get angry. And if people bring up his name somewhere, I sort of like seethe underneath. I'm like, yeah, he's a great guy, But I don't know where it comes from. It's totally irrational. He's always been very nice to me whenever I've seen him publicly. Anyway, we were invited to speak on the same stage together. We would be interviewed. And the interviewer thought it would be fun if we introduced each other. And so I went first, and I turned to him and I said, you make me extremely uncomfortable. You make me really insecure, because all of your strengths are all of my weaknesses, and whenever your name comes up, it makes me cringe. Okay,
so time out. That is a very gutsy move, to just throw down, be vulnerable like that. Yeah. Why did you decide to go that route versus continue to front and pretend?
Well, because people can tell, can't they? Whatever I would have said would have been disingenuous, and people can tell.
Really? Okay.
I'm not that good an actor.
Okay. I think that's an extraordinary...
Or it would have sounded generic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to introduce him. He's a New York Times best-selling author. His work is,
clap it up.
Who cares? Do you want to be introduced that way? It sounds horrible. We all want to be introduced personally, but I didn't have anything nice to say personally. Yeah. So I just said the truth.
What an extraordinary...
But here's the best part, is he turned around and he said, funny, I feel the same about you. We had the feeling about each other, because the reality was our strengths are opposites. And our strengths reveal to each other our weaknesses. And so the insecurity, I didn't actually have hatred for him. It's that because he made me uncomfortable, because he acts like a mirror to me, it's much easier to take all of that negative energy and direct it against someone than it is to take a hard look at myself and say, what work do I have to do? This is not unique to me. Look at politics, the anger and vitriol, rather than at each other, as opposed to saying, where can we do better?
Well, I just think that reaction is extraordinary and rare, amazing. Did you get that clarity in that moment, or did it come to you beforehand and you thought, this is what I'm going to do?
No, it was all in the moment. I didn't know what to expect. I just felt it was the right thing to do, to be totally honest and candid. And it was very cathartic. From that day on, first of all, I've stopped comparing our book rankings, because who cares? Turns out people can buy more than one book. And he and I become close friends. I stayed at his house. We help each other all the time. He's become a really good friend and partner.
So let's go back a little bit and really unpack the how to do this, because I think it's so important. It would have saved me so much heartache. I remember...
It's mindset again.
It is mindset. But it even takes me back to one of the very first episodes I did on this show with actor Rainn Wilson from The Office. He was Dwight. And I asked Rainn, it's hard not to call him Dwight, I asked him, now that you've made it, looking back, is there anyone that he was sort of been holding a grudge against, who either kept you under their thumb or didn't give you that big shot, and now you're like, see, I had what it takes. And he said something very profound I've never forgotten. He said, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So what's the point? And it blew me away. And so in a way, this thinking more infinitely reminds me of the same kind of thing.
Well, it's being focused on the work and the cause you're trying to advance, rather than worrying about what everybody else is doing. You can take account of what others are doing so that you can learn more about yourself, but it's not it's not trying to take account of others so that you can beat them, you know?
It's
about outdoing yourself.
well, and I'm totally on board with it, but I'm also thinking about the other side of the coin, which is the rest of the world is measuring you by vanity metrics. You know, number of subscribers, number of books sold. You know, how many views did this video get, and they assign it a value. And it turns out that's a terrible way to measure value.
It's a way to measure value.
Yeah.
I don't think it's terrible. I think it's unbalanced. You know, there's, you know, if somebody produces a piece of work that is of high value, that has, you know, when Eckhart Tolle wrote his book, you know, a lot of people bought it and he made a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with that. It's because he produced something that's really, really valuable, right? So the metrics are just unbalanced because it's not the only thing that matters, you know? Resources are not the only thing that matters. Will also matters. Like, what does it actually do to, how does it make us feel also matters.
Right.
So the traditional metrics that we have are not wrong, they're just lopsided. You know, is somebody a high value person in our company because they make a lot of sales? I mean, with one metric, yeah, but they're toxic geniuses and they're destroying everybody else's performance, and they would stab you in the back so they can make the sale. Well, how good is that for the future and longevity of the company?
Right.
There's more than one metric. It's not just their performance, but it's also their team. How good a team player are they? And we over-index on performance and don't give enough to whether they're valuable team members. So I think we need to recalibrate, is my point. It's not that the traditional metrics are wrong, it's that they're unbalanced.
And how do we recalibrate?
Well, we have to start paying attention to things like teamwork, trustworthiness. You know, we don't evaluate those things at all. You know, we promote somebody because they reached a goal, they hit an arbitrary number on an arbitrary date. Promote that person. And yet there's somebody else in the company who's always there to support anybody who needs it and gets higher performance out of everybody else on the team, and yet we completely ignore that person because they may be the most gifted natural leader, but they may not be the best individual performer. Yeah. But their team is the highest performing team because of them. So we completely ignore those people in the reward and promotion structure.
How about this scenario? You decide to take a page from your playbook. That person shows some vulnerability, talks about how they're feeling in that moment, and the other person does not reciprocate. You know, they sort of use that against them. I can think of circumstances where someone might say something else instead of, oh, I felt the same way about you. What do you do in that scenario?
Well, I mean, this is a messy human game. You know, being vulnerable doesn't mean you do it every day, all the time, to every person, right? It's about assessing risk and knowing when and how and who. And if there are repercussions, then that's part of the journey too, you know? But it would be foolhardy to take a risk like that to somebody who you know is a serial politician and who's climbed the daggers in your back to make it to where they are today.
Right, you're not going to go in.
Yeah, I would recommend strongly finding somebody else to experiment with your vulnerability.
Well said.
You know, it's not foolhardy. Being vulnerable is not foolhardy. Being vulnerable is very risky.
Right.
You know, even in a personal relationship, it's hugely risky. Just fear of humiliation, fear of embarrassment, fear of being rejected. You know, there's a huge amount of risk that goes with being vulnerable. So you have to assess the risk. And that's why we call it risk, because you have to weigh the risk and be like, I'm going to do this. But if you never do it for fear of being humiliated or embarrassed, if you go through your entire life never taking that risk, then you will struggle to form deep, meaningful relationships personally or professionally.
You're living small.
Yeah, and it drives me nuts when people say, well, there's no place for emotions at work. Work is about rational, and it's about performance, and there's no place for emotions at work, right? Well, if you've ever had any kind of happiness, sadness, anger, you know, insecurity, if you've ever made a decision out of fear, oh, I better do this, it's the wrong thing to do, but you know, I don't want to get in trouble. Well, congratulations, we have emotions at work.
I've always felt that way. I've always wanted to flip the script on that, saying it's not personal, it's just business. I always think
it's all personal.
It's not business, it's just personal.
Yeah.
It's the way it should be.
Yeah, business is always personal.